necessary excuse me, that ensure property owners are copied by all communications to be aware of progress. We have asked for the flow chart. We need to organize the building department website page to make it intuitive for the ultimate customer. We need clear steps of what is expected or required. We suggest videos be created to explain the end-to-end process or project completion. A video featuring the Russian doll analogy that explains how we are a network that must perfectly fit property owners, HOA, town, county, state, Florida, and federal laws, regulations, ordinances, and finally videos that explain the history of the development of Miami Lakes. Why, for example, new property owners read the governing documents and think that these are arbitrary restrictions. Let's take the rule that nothing is built beyond the slope by lake properties. No one seems to consider that our man-made lakes are therefore a construction beyond the slope may weaken the lake wall. Fences, shrubs impede the line of sight at corner lots. All these issues require understanding of the safety achieved by following and adhering to carefully written documents that transfer the knowledge of engineers, architects, developers, and legislators. Please do not forget the great idea of a survey conducted at the end of every project where the property owner sends the results to the survey to town manager Ed Peterman in a self-addressed, self-stamped envelope to capture the data necessary to continue to review the department's progress. This will achieve a self-correcting system, process, and people. Thank you for listening. Hope Reynolds.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think Ms. Reynolds captures a lot of what we had discussed at the last meeting, and we appreciate her input. So we will register the public comment as part of the record. I have to ask a question that perhaps is a naive question, but the HOAs have restriction and deed restrictions that are applicable to each one of the HOAs, but Ed, are those restrictions that the building department worries, concerns itself, or should concern itself when issuing a permit?
When I first started here, there was the practice of the building department, whenever somebody resided in an HOA, if somebody resided in an area that there was no HOA, all they needed to do, the applicant, the permit applicant, was to sign an affidavit saying there is no HOA, or my HOA is defunct, it's inactive, or whatever. Those that did have an HOA, they were required to bring in an approval letter from the HOA even to obtain the permit. And then we started debating internally and saying, who is really charged with enforcing HOA guidelines? And it was not the purview of the building department. So we strayed away from the requirement. There's only two, I think it's one or two instances. Like there is an instance in townhomes, townhome driveways. There is a nexus between HOA rules and the town code. And in those instances, we still continue to this day to ask for an approval letter from the HOA about townhome driveways, that they have to, I'm going from memory, that there's a nexus. That's something that we do still ask for. Otherwise, the HOA rules and restrictions is for the HOA to enforce, and all we continue to enforce is the code, the building code and the town code.
That makes perfect sense because the town...
I think the other one is shutters on townhomes. Both have to do with townhomes, and it was driveways and shutters were the two that we still require the HOA approval letter.
So only townhomes?
Yeah. But it
Not the single
and
family.
only townhomes in those two instances, driveways and shutters.
It would be extremely difficult for a building and permitting area of a municipality to have intimate knowledge of every single HOA requirement and deed restriction at an HOA level. So to require a resident to either sign an affidavit that has been approved by the HOA or to require the resident to show proof of presentation to the HOA is reasonable, but beyond that, I don't see how a township can get involved.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how it came to light, or why it was even a discussion internally. And it happened with one of the HOAs had some kind of a disagreement with one of their owners, and was, the owner wanted to pull a permit, was trying to get a permit for, as far as regards to building code and everything, they were compliant. They had provided plans, they all met, they had gone through the review, but the permit couldn't be issued because we were waiting on the HOA to send us an approval letter. There was, how the HOAs happen, right? There's always disagreements, internal strife between HOAs and their homeowners, and we did not want to be a referee in that disagreement, and we shouldn't be. We've decided that's not our position. That's a disagreement between the HOA and the homeowner. So the application was submitted, it complied with the building code. We decided, we informed them that we were not going to require the approval letter, and we went forward and we issued the permit. So that was the new position now is we do not require it, only in the 2 instances in townhomes that I mentioned.
So it would be difficult at best.
A lot of the deed restrictions in some of the HOAs, for example, the one I belong to, are more strict than the building code. They don't allow certain things.
Right, but the resolution of those conflicts lies within the HOA, not within the municipality, which is
Right.
the real issue is that, it's a great suggestion, but the real issue is that the municipality should not be held accountable or have liability to enforce HOA restrictions that are not part of the code.
So, in other words, someone wants to put in a metal roof right now. Miami Lakes will approve a metal roof.
Yes.
Our HOA doesn't approve it,
Right.
metal roofs.
Right. So for the installation of a metal roof, they come in the Lake Glen Ellen neighborhood and they apply for, and they have plans and everything, the NOAs and everything with the products, and they meet, and it passes plans review, a permit is issued. The issue of whether you're the HOA, the Lake Glen Ellen HOA allows metal roofs, that's a dispute between the owner and the HOA. Yeah.
And it rightfully has to be, from a standpoint of how can the township decline a permit for a perfectly permittable structure within the county and township rules because an HOA chooses to or not choose from an aesthetic perspective? That's kind of difficult. So what I would suggest is that as a committee, we should certainly encourage the city to think through how best to incorporate the HOA, but that we cannot recommend that as a group, I would not be willing to recommend that the HOA elements be brought into a requirement of review by the zoning or permitting department. Very difficult to do, quite honestly. So, okay. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? I mean,
Chair, if we can go back to 3, we do have public comment from Miss Bonnie Cintron. So she is allowed 4 minutes for public comment.
absolutely. Good afternoon, Bonnie. How are you?
Hi, good evening. I'm Esther Bonnie Cintron, and I have lived at 14770 Lewis Road since 1974. I'm here in place of Charles Tumulty, who is our Lake Catherine Association president, but he's out of town and could not be here, so he asked me to come, and he'll follow through or follow up when he returns. My purpose for being here is just to make sure that your committee realizes that Lake Catherine is a very unique entity here in Miami Lakes. We do not have any formal homeowners association, nor do we desire to become a special tax district. The reason that we are unlike other areas of Miami Lakes, because all of us who have property that borders the lake actually are the owners of that lake. And there's only one other lake resident lake like that, but they have a homeowners association that has their rules and regulations. We are the only one that does not, and who are owners. Now, our lake ownership does not mean that we own the water, which is considered to be a fluid or a liquid asset, but we own the land under the water, and we're responsible for keeping the lake in good condition. The issue that we hope your department, in conjunction with code enforcement, can help us with is the hope that you would have the authority to levy fines on those few recalcitrant homeowners who refuse to pay their share of the lake maintenance costs. We're not expecting you to rule on this issue at this time, but we are respectfully asking that you consider it. As homeowners in Lake Catherine, we've always had only your rules and regulations to guide us and to keep our community up to your standards and your specifications. We are required to maintain our property in good order, including our swale areas, which do not belong to us. But our group of homeowners has always kept Lake Catherine in excellent condition, as proven by the most recent water surveys that the town had done. We're just about one of the best lakes for purity in the town. We are a nonprofit group of homeowners, and we divide the yearly cost equally among the property owners. If the code enforcement unit would back us up, we could eliminate the problem of having some people decide not to pay. The town would benefit because any fines collected would go to your coffers, and we would benefit by being spared the extra burden paying for someone else's responsibility. Because once they see something, an authority that does have the power to impose a fine on them, I'm sure they immediately would pay. That's the way it works. This would not set a cumbersome precedent for you in any way, because we're the only lake with this unique situation. So please give the idea some careful thought, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for coming.
If you have any questions?
No, ma'am. My only comment is that this group is probably not the right forum.
Well,
But I will say that it seems to me that this discussion has to be had at a council level, if anywhere.
I think they had a preliminary Zoom meeting or something. I think you were there, Mr. Peterman, when Paul Marino spoke, and I don't think there was any discussion or anything done, but I just wanted the idea.
Yeah,
Because code enforcement is under your jurisdiction, is it not, or no?
Well, we're an ad hoc committee to provide the city with input as to how to improve the process of interaction with the residents and the customers in code enforcement. But at the end of the day, because of you are right, you're a very unique situation. I happen to live in another unique one in Miami Lakes that doesn't have a homeowners island. But given that, I think that is a decision where the council would have to essentially move forward with making some sort of arrangement to be able to enforce that. That is not a service issue. That is not a process issue. That is really more a legality issue that has to be addressed by first the council's attorney, the town council attorney, and then the council itself.
I wasn't at that meeting, but I was told that Mr. Gastesi said to the homeowner who was speaking, you were beginning to annoy me. So I don't know where we're going to get with this.
That's not the right answer.
No, that really floored me. So I guess I'll just tell our president that he has to go through the process of bringing.
We recommend, our recommendation, I think the committee would agree, our recommendation would be that this subject and issue be dealt with at a council level where action can be taken or not taken appropriately, because at the end of the day, it's a decision more for town council
Okay.
than it is for an ad hoc committee for focusing on service
Okay.
delivery. But we really appreciate you taking the time
Thank
to
you.
say that.
I'm-
I have a question. You don't have a homeowners association.
No,
But why do you
it's
have
it's a misnomer. It's called Lake Catherine Homeowners, but we don't. We're registered with the state as
But
a
you do have
nonprofit.
You do have a president, you said.
Yeah, the president is out of town. He's been the president for 20-some years, almost 30 years, I think.
is-
And the point is, no one wants to take the job. No one wants
But
to.
I think what-
We don't even have a quorum. That we try very hard to get a quorum for an annual meeting.
But I think
But
we're-
now they've gone to a system where they think they'll be able to get more input because they're putting everybody on this, I forget what it's called, something monkey, where they can, for any, yeah, for any kind of voting, they will make contact with all the homeowners
Right.
through that and the people can vote. And so maybe
But I
we'll
know where
have,
you're going, so if you have an association, a formal association, which is an entity,
yeah,
and the homes in the lake are part of that entity formally and legally, that organization is empowered to make certain decisions as to.
They have an entity that was created. They're even registered under SunBiz. They have a corporation that
But
that
no
exists,
power.
but it's not an HOA.
no, it's just for the lake
And that
maintenance.
was we've had this discussion with the gentleman that she's referring to, with the administrator or the president of the association. And it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but it ain't a duck. Yeah, that's the difficult part.
That's a strange one. Yeah.
Right, so they are not an HOA, because that was our initial retort was, you have the ability to impose fines, levy liens, impose liens, and to collect your HOA dues, and even foreclose on those HOA liens to enforce that. But all the research proved, so really it ends up being, and I think our town deputy attorney, Lorenzo Covilla, the recommendation was to go seek counsel from an HOA type to see about forming an HOA. We even explored the avenue of creating a special taxing district that we oversee several taxing districts, two of which are lake maintenance taxing districts.
Yep.
And that could have been a solution, but
But it would require
No,
one or the other.
because nobody, when we did have our poll our people and ask about that, they talked to some people, I think it was in Lake Patricia, who had done this and become a special tax district. And the Lake Patricia people were very upset with how their lake had deteriorated because they no longer had control over who was doing the maintenance. And the people around our lake, because we actually own the lake, do not want to give up their ownership of the lake. So that's why they will never go with a special tax district.
But to Mr. Peterman's point, unfortunately, if you really want to rein in those homeowners who are not cooperating with a larger group voluntarily, the only way to do it would be through either a taxing district which controls.
Yeah, well, we know
or-
that that's not
Or
going to happen.
essentially creating the HOA within the organization or the entity you've already created, and then being able to use that vehicle as a way to enforce.
And
if you
see,
will.
and nobody wanted that either because we don't like all those rules.
Oh, I know.
We have enough with the town rules and regulations. That's all they want to deal with. So it's just a vicious
It's- it's
cycle.
a-
But
it's a difficult-
maybe I should talk with Mr. Gastesi. We just don't understand why, if we have to maintain our property and the lake is our property and we have to maintain it, if we don't maintain the front, the grass, and if we never cut it, we get cited. But we thought, okay, if you don't do your part to maintain the lake, you should get cited, but we'll see. But thank you for listening.
Oh, no,
and
thank you
for
so much.
advising me.
We understand how difficult the dilemma is. Thank you.
Well,
Well,
Okay, so can we move back to the minutes?
we have somebody else?
Public comments has closed. We can move on to the minutes.
Thank you. So I'm sure everyone has had an opportunity now to review the minutes as we discussed earlier, just anecdotally, we did a lot of materials went into the minute last time around. We started to essentially create the recommendation structure and some of the subject matters that were going to be touched. Obviously, after today's meeting and the public meeting, the next two meetings should be devoted to cleaning these up and making it a little more, adding more clarity. They're sort of cryptic right now because they're placeholders, but getting into a little more detail. But the reality is that I think we got a lot thrown up on the board at the last meeting to take a look at and consider. What we had agreed at the last minute and at the last meeting was that we would follow a committee timeline that would essentially allow this meeting to take place, the public session to take place, and then the July 22nd and 29th meeting would be the cleanup meetings to assemble the final package, approve it as a committee, and then present it to the council. When was that going to be? When is the sunset date?
For the August council meeting,
For the August
which
meeting, okay.
I think it's August 10th, or it's the second Tuesday of August.
So essentially, we've got two more sessions after today. And I would tell you that going through this today and trying to revisit these issues is not really productive. I mean, at this point, what we need to do is really pay attention to the public comments or those that are going to be in the public forum, and then use the next two meetings to finalize, put a lid on the jar and kind of put the label on it and deliver it.
So the next regular council meeting would be August 10th,
Okay.
like Mr. Peterman said, and the chair would go up to council and present the recommendations.
Right. And
I'm going to act as the chair today. But the chair
You're
will,
acting chair today, but Mr.
in
Trellis
fairness
will
to
be
him, he
going
started
up
as the
to
chair. He
council.
did a fine job, and he should be the one to present it. So,
when he was here.
So I agree. And August 10th, I'm actually out of town.
okay.
So the
So that
acting.
kills that idea. Okay. So Hermang isn't here. We'll nominate him. I'm just
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah,
you
somebody
guys-
will present, the committee, some
Yes.
representative of the committee will present. Just make sure to email Gina and make sure that on the agenda template for the
Mm-hmm.
August meeting, that she places them under committees to make sure that they're there
Yes.
so they can report back.
Yes, and then any supporting materials you would send to me so I can send that to Gina so she can add it into the agenda.
Yeah, I think after the 29th, we'll be able to provide you with the materials that are going to be presented at that meeting.
That's well in advance of the deadline. The deadline's usually like the Wednesday
It's
before or
usually
something like
7
that. So
days-
you're well within the
7 days
deadlines.
prior, sent to the liaison, so then it can be sent to the town clerk.
Now, I'm sure, much like just happened, I'm sure there's a lot of folks that have heard about this committee and have said, oh, they're there for this, or they're there for that, or unfortunately, we're not here to revamp building permits, and we're here for a different purpose. There's a lot of, I've heard from a couple of people that have said, how are you guys going to deal with the Surfside issue, and are you going to even talk about that? And the reality is, at this point in time, it's too early for any group to be addressing what is going to be the spinoff to the Surfside issue. The Surfside issue is going to be handled much deeper than we could ever handle as a group, an ad hoc group. And it's going to have to wait until the state and the county do some things before even looked at by municipalities. I will say that, as lenders, we fully realize that the impact of Surfside is going to be extensive and way beyond anything you could ever imagine. We're very, very well aware that HOAs are going to be impacted. We're very well aware that insurance for properties that are within HOAs are going to be impacted.
The building code?
Building code is going to be impacted, but it's such a vast number of factors that for this group, it would be a disservice to even start to consider.
We had a lot of changes to the building code after Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this one is going to create a lot more changes as well.
And
And after Katrina, we had a lot of changes to the wind.
Yeah.
What I would ask for
the
the committee to at least recommend incorporating into your series of recommendations, dealing with the Surfside issue and what Mr. Gonzalez just mentioned about code changes, is for you to recommend to the council that they take a position urging the county that any review of the South Florida Building Code incorporate input from municipalities. Sometimes, sometimes the county, big brother, they think they know better, and there may be unique input that they should get from municipalities, and include municipalities into the discussion. And that may be something for you to consider, something I thought about yesterday. And they've been very proactive and talking about this thing that they're going to do and that thing. And I don't know how much input they're going to receive from cities. And cities really are closer to most residents than the county. And they should consider including municipal input in their recommendation.
We can certainly make that recommendation to the council. The council will have to pursue it aggressively with the county. I know the county is forming a group to address these issues. The difficulty is that each municipality has such a unique and different set of standards when it comes to the type of structures contained in the municipality. I mean, we haven't got a building in this area that's over 7 stories. Or 6 stories. That's it. That's the biggest one right here. We're nowhere near, a water issue with sea salt. Input is going to be wonderful, but at the end of the day, it's probably going to take years to sort out, and it's going to require a tremendous amount of thought at the state, county, and municipality level.
How many, I don't know if this is something you've researched, how many buildings do we have that are near 40 years or over 40 years?
I think there are 14.
Yeah, 14 or 16.
Yeah, 14, and they're all at different stages. They're all in and around that 40-year recertification period is the number that we found.
So as a recommendation, as far as servicing the community, right now, the 40-year recertification only requires that structural and electrical systems are inspected by an engineer, signed off, and make sure it's okay.
And life safety.
And right, and life safety. But one of the only recommendations I would put, just because we're sitting here, is maybe adding a plumbing aspect to it. Plumbing systems are not something that are renewed, like an HVAC system. Those are popped in and out of buildings fairly quickly. But a plumbing system is something that embedded in concrete, that's something that should be looked at, because if it starts cracking, you start leaking, you don't have to live near the ocean to have moisture damaging your structure. It could be your plumbing systems as well. So I would recommend that we, within our recommendations of maybe asking Miami-Dade County to listen to the local municipalities, maybe even add an additional layer to the inspection of the plumbing system of the building as well.
Yeah, I'd almost go further than that and say that we urge the county to incorporate not just aspects of the building construction, but technology that is more appropriate and capable of determining and assessing whether there's damage beyond what is visual. Because quite honestly, the 40-year inspection is, it's lift the hood and look at the top of the engine, right?
What you see.
That's what you see. So I think our recommendation should be that we urge the county to incorporate a more robust examination of the properties above a certain level of density that incorporates plumbing and all of their aspects with technology that is more current and more capable of identifying key issues. Because Surfside should have been looked at beyond just a visual inspection, in spite of the fact that it was probably easily seen, given that there's a report on file from 18, right? But that's critical, and certainly moving it up to not 40 years.
Yeah, now I was gonna, and that's playing to what you're saying, Ed, is listening to the local municipalities, because someone on the beach is going to say, you should have every 10 years, you should be looking at my building.
Right.
Someone in Miami Lakes might say every 20 years, every 25 years. So listening to local municipalities and maybe changing that around. And that's something that's way above our heads. And I think that's going to be a much bigger committee that Dade County is going to take on. And they're putting a team together to look at
one
that.
size may not fit all
Exactly.
for all those things. And that's where they can make the distinction between a building in a coastal community versus a suburban
And
community.
they actually do that right now in the building code. They do that already.
Right.
With different types of exposures. So when you're designing for wind, if you're a coastal building, you're designing for higher winds or more stringent design pressures than it is, more inward, right? So maybe take an approach to that. So to that sense is something we could.
Yeah, those are all things, and by having the municipal input, you could address all those, right? Because if somebody and some bureaucrat in some office downtown says, oh, no, now we got to do all this, and their tunnel vision is only a building like the one that fell in, that collapsed in Surfside, well, the input from a suburban municipal, low-rise bedroom community can say, hey, hold on, let's discuss. And then they can provide that, they could temper some of the overkill, overreach.
Yeah.
I mean, perfect example is, if you require one way for everything, building like Surfside, maybe that does make sense. Having every 10 years, you're inspecting all your systems. But for instance, City of Miami requires anything that's a fourplex, have a 40-year recertification on it. So to do a full in-depth, as you do to Surfside, to do it to a fourplex in Little Haiti or in one of those areas, monetarily maybe doesn't make sense, right? And the risk of it is much less.
And I think what's going to happen, quite honestly, is that the state is going to be involved, because remember that a lot of these things that we do in Dade County, not necessarily the rest of the state does.
The 40-year recertification is a Dade
Is
County
unique
thing.
to Dade County. So
Yeah.
I suspect.
Dade and Broward are the only ones that
Yeah,
require it right now.
I suspect you're going to see the state
Yes.
trickle down certain guidelines
They've
that
got
are,
buildings in the water as well.
Yeah.
All over the state.
yeah. So it's certainly too early for any input other than to say, we wanted a seat at the table, right? And
Correct.
we'd like to have input, but this is going to take years to sort out.
Well, Hurricane Andrew happened in '92, and it wasn't until '02.
'02.
'02 is when the code was rewritten,
Yeah,
and that was the
so-
first year of the Florida Building Code. So it took 10 years back then.
But to your point, it doesn't hurt to say, hey, we'd like a seat at the table, and we'd like to be able to have input. Maybe not at the state level, but at the municipal level at the very least. Whatever can be done to avoid another Surfside is certainly welcome, because that's a disaster that one doesn't want to relive. Again, I'm not sure what we're going to do for the next half hour.
Let's approve the minutes.
Yeah, so can we move to approve the minutes? Can I have a motion, please?
I have a motion.
I second it.
Do we have a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes have been adopted as presented. And kudos to the secretary, because that was one hell of a meeting to have the minute.
Who was that made that motion? You did. Thank you.
Made me chair, right?
And is it possible for us to adjourn and just have discussion, conversation until folks start to show up at 6:30? Or because I don't want any discussion to be minutes.
Yeah, I wouldn't adjourn, you're just going to recess.
Yeah, we can recess, if you don't mind. I'd like a motion to recess the meeting until 6:30, please.
Yes.
I believe we can I mean,
Yeah.
because the meeting is publicly scheduled and you're talking about committee stuff on a public, so I believe,
Yeah, you can recess and then
Yes.
just go recess until 6:30 and you go back
Yeah,
into
let's do
session at
that. If you don't
6:30.
mind, I'd like a motion to recess till 6:30.
yes.
Motion to recess to 6:30.
Second? Discussion? Hearing none, we're going to recess until 6:30. And then we can
Yeah, there he goes. One step ahead of us. Thank you, Ariel. Yeah. Hey,
Good evening.
do we have a mic, Elizabeth, for the gentleman to use for his, oh,
To the podium?
okay.
Up to the gentleman, because he's been patiently waiting behind us and listening to us chatter away.
I know he wants to get home.
Jerry, you,
Please.
yeah, somewhere where there's a mic, so that way
Yeah, we're more comfortable.
it'll transmit. Yeah,
That one, just
Take
press the
your shoes
little
off,
button
kick
in
your
the
feet
middle.
That's
up.
better, so we don't get you.
There we go. And it's the middle, little, at the bottom, right here.
There you go. There you go. My name is Jared Jelencic. I've been a resident of Royal Oaks West for 33 years. So my credentials, I'm currently a active real estate agent. Have held my license for 13 years. Prior to that, I was a real estate title examiner and title agent for 10 years. And prior to that, I have 28 years as an IT professional, including 2 years of AutoCAD support. So, sure. One way or another. The reason I'm here is because after 33 years, my house is in a little state of repair and I need a new roof. And with that, I decided to make an addition to take my U-shaped patio and extend the roof to give me a covered patio. We also decided in the re-roofing process to go ahead and get solar panels. So I have a whole lot of going on with the building department right now. My little addition, which was just to put a beam across the opening and rafters to connect it and put sheeting over it, took me 15 weeks to get finally approved. The communication process with the building department is not good. There was no one that would answer a direct question. There was no one that would return a call. I finally raised the issue to the mayor and my councilman. They got me in touch with Michael Mesa, and he responded and says, "You can deal with Angel next week. I'm out of here." So it was like, all right, in the middle of all this, I have to deal with a changeover within the department. Interesting enough, just from an observation, I did the initial permit, it was approved, and then we did some demolition, found that the dimensions were not what we expected. So like a good doobie, we decided to submit a revision. The revision got hung up, and both the initial plan submission took 3 revisions before it was approved, and the revision also took 3 rounds before it was approved. Ironically enough, the roofing permit took 3 revisions to be done. The solar took 3 revisions to be done. And the revision to the roofing is now on its 2nd issue. And during the re-roofing process, they broke one of the skylights. So we replaced the skylights with similar skylights that were approved for my roofing addition plan. And even though they submitted the NOAs with the plans, they came back and said, your sketch does not show the position of where they're located on the roof. I'm not exactly sure why that's important, since they were replacing existing skylights, but that's the type of thing that we get back. When I did my initial submission for the permit for my addition, it was rejected the first time, saying that there was no survey attached. So, and a couple other issues with the architectural design. So we had the architect do it, and I said, rather than have this delayed because it's taking so long, can I submit this now and provide the survey later if it's required? But I'd like an explanation as to why the survey was required. It was just a roof covering. We're not adding walls. We were not putting down any new flooring. There was no change in elevation. It was extending the existing roof line, so it did not affect the setbacks. So it didn't make sense that we needed a survey and an elevation certificate for the plans to be approved by flood. But I couldn't get around it, so I had to spend $400 to do so. After the plans were rejected a second time, saying you did not include the survey, we resubmitted them with the survey, of course, and I was charged an additional $97.04 because I guess each time we do a submittal, there's a flat upfront fee. In the final revision process, we got a note, which was the second time it came back with the same thing from the structural, saying that we needed a narrative to accompany the drawings, and it needed to be noted within the plans, etc. My architect did not understand what they were asking for. He had revised the plans, he had clouded all the changes. There was notations as to why the changes were on the plan, but it appeared after speaking with the new building official that we needed a letter simply explaining why we were doing the revisions. And of course, logic asks, why do we need a letter to explain the revisions? Because our comments are not going to change the building code. The plans submitted stand by themselves. The original plans that we submitted stood by themselves. We didn't need an explanation as to why we wanted to put on a roof. So there's a little pushback. And I was explained that the reason for it is because they don't have time to review the hundreds of applications that they get, and that they don't pull the original ones. They rely on an explanation as to what they're looking at and why they're doing it. So it's like, can I provide the letter? It says, no, it has to be from a licensed individual so that their credentials are online for anything that's missed. And it's like, okay, so it's all to cover, but it doesn't make sense. You know, even if I, as an uncredentialed person, were to give an explanation and they were to review the plans and look at the prior one, they would see what the changes were and help them focus on what the changes were. So it seemed more difficult than what it should be. My simple addition was quoted by a contractor for $5,000. I have to date, along with my survey, paid $1,849 in permitting fees, which is 34% of the project. It's kind of ludicrous. So, you know, other things, you know, your department is clairvoyant. And I say that because I have an email that they answered me 2 hours before I asked the question. How is that possible? It appears that the server that they're using is probably in the Midwest, and they haven't adjusted for the timestamp on the emails. I brought that up to them. It has not yet been corrected, but I do find it kind of humorous. What else can I add? Like I said, it's very hard to contact the building department. The people that review the plans, there is not an email to which you can call them or send an email to them. The one individual that we were with structural was Marcel Rodriguez. He is not even a town employee, so he's not in the directory of the employees either. And it's like, So he's just a mystery person that we can't get a hold of. When I did speak with Angel Riveras, even though he's his boss, he could not do the final approval as there. I camped out in City Hall, waited for the gentleman for 2 hours. And apparently he only comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 2 and 4. And they said he is swamped and he's sorry, but they can't get to review my plans, probably not tomorrow when he comes in either. And it's like, well, if they can't review the plans and there's a backlog, maybe the gentleman needs to work more frequently or longer hours. You know, to wait 15 weeks to add 200 square feet to a roof is very frustrating. I could never get any callbacks. You know, the engineer requested and sent emails saying, look, you know, we're not sure what you're asking for in the revision of the plans. I think it can be resolved with a phone call. If you would take the time to call me, please do so. He never got a response. The other thing I want to talk about communications. Of the 4 plans submitted, each of which have had 3 revisions or 3 reviews, that would be 12 status changes, of which the e-permit system supposedly gives an auto response at the end. Of those 12 events that should have been notifications, I have only received 5 emails. And the engineer told me the same thing. And I took the time to make sure that I was a contact on all the permits so that I, as a homeowner, could follow up. But it does no good if it doesn't happen. And of course, from the time the permits or the plans were reviewed and approved in the final stage, it's another 3 days before the successful emails even went out. So we're looking at a window of 10 to 13 days from the time I submit a plan to the time I know the results of those, which is why the lag and it carried on for 15 weeks. You know, that needs to be sped up. It's just not an acceptable turnaround.
That you submitted took 10 to 13 days.
Pardon?
Every revision that you submitted took between 10 and 13 days.
Well, yes and no. I was very lucky one day I submitted it on a Wednesday and it was approved on a Thursday. I never received an email that it was done. So, you know, it
Boils down to communication. It's a communication problem.
It's just communications. It's just communications, you know. It's rationale and common sense reasoning on needing a survey or not. You know, from a tile examiner, I understand encroachments and that sort of thing. But when it's extending an existing roof line, it didn't make sense. There was no change in floor elevation. Why they would need an elevation for flood, I don't know. So it just defies some logic.
Was this new space going to be habitable? Did you enclose it with walls, or were you just extending the roof line?
No, it's just extending.
Just
so I'd have
extending
a
the roof
covered
line, you
patio.
weren't enclosing it? Okay.
Mhm. You know, one of the revisions was we opened up the walls and found that the distance between the tie beam and the joint, the trusses, because they were a knee truss, we had engineered a 16-inch LVL beam to go across. And when we opened it up, there's 21 inches. And it didn't make sense to shim it up 5 inches because I thought that would not be stable on top of the wall. And let's get it down on top of the tie beam and tie it directly in. So all we wanted to do is increase the beam width, you know, from 16 to 21 inches. And it took another 3 revisions and another 2 weeks.
I think it's, maybe I'm mistaken, but I think it's standard procedure here to request a survey for any type of permit that you get. Because I myself, I've gotten a couple of permits here and I've had to produce surveys as well.
Yeah.
And actually on the package, you know, in all honesty, in the package, it said this survey was required as one of the things. Now, I questioned it. I didn't have it ready because the surveyors are all backed up because of turnover in real estate. And they told us 2 weeks, and it's like, well, let me submit the plans now and we'll wait on the survey if that's, but can you tell me if it's really necessary? And no one gave me an answer. So when the rejection came back and said one of the reasons was you didn't have a survey, we went ahead and ordered the survey. But again, I'm not sure I understand the logic for that. You know, if it was a fence and you're encroaching on property lines, I get it. If you're doing an addition or a pool and you're again encroaching or changing the footprint of it, I get it. But not for covering a patio.
Jerry, to all your points, I mean, that's been really the goal of this committee from the beginning. When we started our first day, we were tasked to come up with 2 goals. And the 2 goals that we came up with that we've kind of abided by for every meeting that we've had was communication and consistency. And I'm nodding my head as.
And I'm just giving you anecdotal examples.
You gave me everyone. That's why everyone was like, that was the reason I feel that this was put together, because like you, I'm sure there's many folks out there that will not come to the meeting or too shy to come to the meeting. At the same time, I've known neighbors that have had very positive experiences. I live in the town, and my experiences with the building department a few years back wasn't so positive either. So I share a lot of the stuff personally that you've gone through. So that's been our goal, and that's almost all of our recommendations, that the bullets, the highlights that we've put together. We tried to keep them where we can go back and tie in communication and consistency with each one. So
now, one of the other things, the fees that I was charged was for scan fees, $17.50 for the blueprint size and 19 cents a piece for each 8.5 by 11 copy. The NOAs that they required, it was almost 90 pages.
Yeah.
I don't know who the hell really reviews 90 pages. One of the rejections was because we use Simpson strong ties as part of the structure. They do not have a Dade County NOA. So the engineer put an evaluation report attached to the plans. They were rejected because he did not have NOAs. We resubmitted it, and this time we included a cover sheet, 3 pages from the state Department of Professional Regulations, making reference to the approved item and the evaluation code number to which it's referenced, and that satisfied the requirement. Now, that's not what the response back from the reviewer was to do. He wanted NOAs. And again, here's where a phone call might have been simple enough to answer it. But again, no communication. Or his comments need to be more specific as to what he's looking for. If we do not have direct communications to them, the communications we have should be concise.
So to that point, I've heard that happen a lot in Dade County. In Dade County, they require the NOA. And so that's something that goes back to consistency, right? If you go to Miami-Dade County, you can use an NOA or a Florida product approval for any of your structural elements. If you go to Miami, same thing. You go to Miami Beach, same thing. I've done stuff here in Miami Lakes using Simpson strong ties, who 90% of their products are Florida product approvals, because Miami-Dade is a small, very, very small area for them to cover. So I've gotten stuff approved using Florida product approvals with Simpson for commercial and residential here in Miami Lakes. So that ties back to consistency, and that's something that training, and because if you look at what a Florida product approval as far as testing requires for a Simpson strong tie, a structural connection, it goes almost hand in hand with what Miami-Dade County NOA requires. The only thing that changes really is going to be like when you go to like windows. There's one small little change in how many times they cycle a window compared Florida product approval compared to Miami-Dade NOA.
Well, and the
And even
evaluation
then, they still accept the Florida
reference
product approval.
to, South Florida Building Code and the high wind impact, whatever. I mean, it should have been sufficient. It really should have. Why those extra 3 pages from the Department of Professional Regulation made a difference, I don't know.
And that's something that within our recommendation, and the consistency side of things could be something more along the lines of training and more, because I know there's CE hours for PEs. And I know for officials, for building officials and plan reviewers, there are also, but maybe there could be some kind of in-house kind of monthly lunch and learn thing that they go over certain topics that have been headaches within the local municipality and maybe talk about it and come up with a plan to be consistent across the board. Maybe that's something else that we can include within our recommendations.
Yeah, we in the last discussion, we included self-evaluation and discussion about those finer points on a quarterly basis as a recommendation. And perhaps included in that self-evaluation should be elements of consistency and the acceptance of certain standards or not in the process, right? But everything, every single statement you've made goes back to what we have been discussing as an absolute need of improvement. Every single one. From the time you mentioned someone that you can't, we believe and have stated that one of the things that should happen is every permit should be owned by someone in the department. And at the end of the day, a resident shouldn't have to deal with 5 people or 4 people. There can be one clear communication point.
Well, and it
makes
appears,
so much
it
easier.
appears too that there seems to be a single path of the permit process. And mine was being hung up in structural. He only comes in twice a week. So it didn't get handed off to plumbing or to anybody else until structural came in and passed it on to the next department. I can understand procedures and flow, and it would be fine if he was here every day. But as a part-time employee, it really kind of bogs down the system. So that was my experience. I, of course, have, talked to numerous contractors who have bid on the project. And I think the most pertinent comment was, I don't want to take the job here because Miami Lakes is a Coral Gables wannabe. They're the most difficult building department to work with.
Do you remember this?
So
That's
another point.
Yeah, we
I mean, I appreciate you taking care of the public and our safety to a point. So it has to be balanced.
yeah. So it's difficult for us to have an impact on the standards and professional regiments of the department, because obviously those are governed by a completely different set of rules than we can tackle. But everything you've stated is a customer service issue more than a regulatory issue, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that I could rest assured that everything we've been discussing and that everything that is incorporated in our recommendation addresses those points. As to flow of work in a department, difficult to do when you're outside looking in, and if there is a good reason for that workflow to follow that pattern and that path, so long as you as a resident understand what that workflow is, why it's happening, and how the sequential works, it's great. You have the right expectation. If the right expectation isn't set, we're off on the wrong start to begin with. So we appreciate your comments because they validate and clearly validate many of the things that we've suggested or we're going to suggest as possible paths to solve those problems, right? They're issues we've tried to address. Not knowing the specifics of a situation like yours, but more just from commonsensical viewing it from an outside window.
So I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening.
What I found most interesting is one of the points we made time and time again is when the contractor point. The minute you have a contractor say, we don't want to work in Miami Lakes, it's working against the resident.
And the price.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present that would like to? No?
No, it seems like we have No one else from the public?
So as we had agreed, I think listening to this particular scenario kind of validates a lot of the things that we had discussed, and reaffirms to a certain degree that these things do happen, right? And we have to address them. The next path on this would be, we need to reconvene for the next meeting, which is scheduled for the
July 22nd
the
at
22nd.
5:30.
The July 22nd meeting, I propose that we take a work session approach to it, that we now start to convert all of our recommendations, the observations made by some of the residents, be it by public comment or appearance today, and all of the measures we've discussed and suggestions we've discussed today, including the ones that we've suggested today, and start to incorporate a presentation for the commission, for the council, come August. We'll have 2 meetings to do that. We'll have one to kind of
Create a draft.
another one to finalize the product, and then decide who's going to present it at the commission meeting. I again stress that the purpose of this group was to address primarily that customer interaction, that customer service issue. Our purpose was not in any way, shape, or form to address the professional standards or the guidelines to code enforcement, or because this is not a group that's prepared to do that, nor should it, for that matter. We're acting as representatives of the community with respect to customer service, level of transparency, information, et cetera, et cetera. So,
That we haven't had just one person come in, but that person addressed every comment that
every
we had.
single comment we had. So that's really an amazing.
Yes.
You're right. You're right. Well, in other public comments, we've seen flashes
Yes, yes.
of these issues. Never with the level of representation or clarity that's been delivered today. But there's nothing like real life experience to essentially put the seal
Exactly.
on a comment. So, the fact that we had the gentleman present today is important, validating, and I think adds a lot of value to the process that we followed. What we're going to need for the next meeting is clerical support we're going to need your copious note capability for that screen up there, so we can start to
Yes.
work on.
Mr. Peterman and I were speaking on that. So we'll find clerical support for typing.
Yeah, so that we
Creating
can
the
put
draft.
everything up on the board and
Mhm.
start to fine tune the suggestions. Yeah. I would like to say that, it's been a pleasure thus far to work with this group, and everyone here has had the best of intentions in discussing the issues and in identifying what has resonated today as possible issues that we needed to address. And it really, it says a lot for the township, really. The township formed an ad hoc committee to address this, and the town took the interest, and it says a lot for the citizens that have participated and provided input. Because at the end of the day, we all live here, we all play here, we all want to have the best community possible. So it's a very nice process to see happen. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. No discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. The meeting has been adjourned, and we will see each other on July 22nd.